In this video, I'm going to be showing you guys how you can edit 3D viral Instagram reels like Houston, Kold, or Bart VFX. And specifically, I'm going to be showing you guys how I edited this reel intro in Adobe After Effects.
You need to allocate most of your focus to your business in order to succeed. And this is because there's plenty of competition in the world of business.
Also, just a quick mention, if you are a beginner or intermediate video editor looking to level up and edit like a professional as soon as possible, then I would highly recommend that you check out my video editing product skill cut through the top link in the description below. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new composition. I'm going to name mine 3D Reels Tutorial 3. The resolution is going to be 1080 by 1920 pixels. Then I'm going to import the assets which I'm going to be using for this video. You can find a link to them in the description below. Then I'm going to start off by importing the voiceover, which is just this AI voice which I made. I made the script and, got the AI voice myself. This is just for the purpose of this video. I will not be posting this video.
You need to allocate most of your focus to...
Then I'm going to create a new black solid, and I'm going to import this wave background that you can also find a link to in the description below. Then I'm going to create another black solid, and I'm going to search up in the effects and presets gradient ramp, and I'm going to add that onto the top black solid. I'm going to make the bottom color this blue color, and I'm just going to increase the first point, so and then it's up here, and the point is around -500. I'm then going to change the opacity of the top black solid to 60%, and I'm going to change the opacity of background 8, or like the wave background, to 25%. I'm then going to change the ramp scatter on the gradient to 512, which is the max, and this will mean the colors transition better together. I am then going to create a new camera. You can follow my settings, but the main things you should make sure are that the camera type is one node camera, and that the enable depth of field box is not checked. Then I'm going to create a new null object, and I'm going to add that below camera 1. I'm then going to highlight all of these layers apart from the voiceover, and I'm going to press the 3D icon to make them all 3D, and I'm going to link the camera 1 to the null one. I'm then going to keyframe the position and the Z rotation at the start for camera 1, and I'm going to go forward by around a second, and I'm going to add another 2 set of keyframes after that, and I'll go back to the original ones. And I'm just going to move the camera closer to the background, and I'm going to do this by using the third position value, and I'm also going to rotate the Z rotation, so and then it's around +14. Then I'm going to highlight these 4 keyframes. I'll press F9, then I'm going to go into the graph editor to create a steep peak at the start. Then I'm going to get the text tool, and I'm going to type up "you need to," and then I'm going to change the font to Impact, which I'm pretty sure is inbuilt into After Effects. I'm then going to put this text below null 1, and I'm going to make it 3D. Then I'm just going to scale it up and position it in the middle like so. I'm then going to highlight the word need, and I'm going to change that to a yellowy orange color. And I'm going to search up in the effects and presets glow, and I'm going to add this glow effect onto the text. I'm going to increase the glow radius, and I'll decrease the glow intensity to around. If your computer is slow, I would recommend that you add the glow after you've done everything else. And as the voiceover says allocate, I'm going to cut the you need to text, and I'm going to change the second part of it, so and then it now says allocate. And then I'm going to center that and scale it up and position it in the middle. And as you can see, it goes, "you need to allocate." Now I'm going to add a transition onto this allocate text. And to do this, you can use the typewriter inbuilt effect in After Effects, or you can animate it yourself. There's loads of ways to animate text. But personally, to save time, I'm going to go to Window, and then I'm going to open up Animation Composer 3. I'm not sponsored or affiliated with this company. It's just a very easy way to add pre-made transitions and effects onto the video, and it just saves me time. So I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to go to Start of Presets, Transitions Text Layer, and I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to find Scale Characters 2, and I'm going to add that at the start. Then I'm just going to move the banner closer to the start, and when we play this back, as you can see, there is a transition. But actually, I'm just going to move the banner even closer to the start, and I'm also going to make the gap between these 2 keyframes a bit smaller. And just before the second set of keyframes, I am going to keyframe the position on null 1, and then I'm going to go forward by around a second or 2, and I'm going to basically move the camera closer to the allocate text by increasing the third position value. And actually, I'm going to highlight the allocate and you need to texts, and I'm going to basically decrease the third position value, so and then both of them move closer to the camera. And my goal is basically when the null 1 scales in and you have that second scale in movement, I want it to go through the text at the perfect time. And to achieve this, I'm just going to keep adjusting the position until I get that point. But I'm trying to match this to the voiceover, so this is why I'd recommend that you download the voiceover and use the same voiceover as me if you're going to follow along with this video. And now I'm happy with that. I'm just going to highlight these 2 keyframes. I'll press F9, I'll go into the graph editor, and I'll create a steep peak to the left of the middle. And when I play this back, as you can see, it zooms out and then zooms back in, and it goes through the text. So now the text is no longer visible at the end of the movement. I shall move these 2 keyframes closer to the start as well. I shall move them a bit closer again. And now I've got the timing of everything right. I'm now just going to scale down the "you need to" text and position it back in the middle. And just temporarily, I'm just going to extend it further so and then I can like center it easier. And I'm also going to scale down and center the "allocate" text as well. But I want there to be a bigger amount of time where you can see the "allocate" text before it zooms in, so I'm just going to play around with the keyframes until I achieve this. And I'm also just going to center the "allocate" text as well. And I'll shorten the "allocate" transition a bit as well. And now I'm happy with this, I'm going to move on to the next part. So I'm going to go up to the top and I'm going to get the shape tool and I'm going to keep pressing Q until I get the ellipsis tool. Then I'm going to hold shift and draw a perfect circle like so with just the stroke. There's no fill, just a stroke. And the stroke's going to be around this big. And then I'm going to center the circle and I'm going to search up in the effects and presets gradient ramp and I'm going to add that onto the circle. I'm going to make the first point like at the top and the second point at the bottom of the circle. I'll make the top color a light blue color like this. Then I'm going to search up in the effects and presets glow and I'm going to add the glow effect onto the circle. I'll increase the radius to around 190 and I'll decrease the intensity to around 0.8. And I do really like this, so I'm going to keep it like that. I'm then going to make the circle 3D and I'm going to move it further away because I want this to be like behind the text. So I'm basically just going to increase the third position value, which will move it further away from the camera. But the problem is now it's gone behind the original like background, with the like waves and stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight all 3 layers of the background, like the 2 black solid layers and the background 8, the wave background. And I'm just going to increase the third position value of that one. So and then it's more than the circle. So and then now the circle is in front of the original background and it can now be seen again. But the problem is now we've run out of like background at the start because we've scaled it in. And also we will need it to be bigger anyway. So what we're going to do to extend the actual background without actually having to scale it in and make it less like and lower the quality of it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to search up in the effects and presets motion tile and I'll add the motion tile effect onto one of the background layers. I'll increase the output width to 500 and the output height to 500. I'll then check mirror edges and I'll copy this and then paste it on the other 2 background layers. And now, as you can see, it will extend further on. So then now the background is fully over the composition again. And I also want the text to like kind of fade out a bit just before it goes behind the camera. So around this point here, I'm also going to keyframe the opacity at 100%. Then I'm going to go forward by a couple frames and I'm going to make the opacity 0%. And as you can see, that makes it just a bit smoother. And I'm also going to drop this shape layer 1 or circle below the null. And I'm also going to make it start around 1 second in, or just as the allocate text starts to fade away. And I'm then going to open up this arrow and I'm going to add trim paths. Then I'm going to open up trim paths. I'll keyframe the end amount at 0% around a second in. Then I'm going to go forward by around a second or 2, and I'm going to increase the end to 90%. I'm going to highlight these 2 keyframes. I'll press F9. I'll go into the graph editor to create a steep peak right at the start, like so. And actually, I'm going to move this circle even further away from the camera, and then it's going behind the background again. So I'm going to move the background further away from the camera again as well. Then I'm going to get the text tool, and I'm going to type up in the middle of the circle 90%. I'll make the layer 3D, and I'll position it below the null 1. Then I'm going to scale it up and position it back in the middle. Then I'm going to change the fill color of this text to white, and I'm going to search up in the effects and presets glow, and I'll add it onto the text. I'm going to increase the radius to around 130, and I'll also add a drop shadow onto this text. I'll increase the distance to around 10, and the softness to around 200. and I'll also decrease the intensity to around 0.8. But I also want to make this fade in because it will look smoother. So around 1 second in, like the first allocate opacity keyframe, I'm going to keyframe the 90% text, like keyframe the opacity of it at 0%. Then I'm going to go forward by a couple frames, and then I'm going to make it 100% as well. And I'm also going to trim it so it starts here as well. Then I'm going to search up in the effects and presets slider control, and I'm going to open up the arrow, and I'm going to go to text. Then I'm going to alt click on the source text stopwatch, and this will open up this box of code. Now this may seem a bit complicated, but just follow along exactly with what I'm doing and you'll have the same result as me. So I'm going to link this text like so to the slider at the top, and at the start of the bit of code, I'm going to type up math.round and then opening bracket and closing bracket. Then I'm going to get rid of the closing bracket. Then I'm going to go to the end of the slider and I'm going to add a closing bracket. Then I'm going to do space plus space again and then double commas. Then in between the two double commas, I'm going to add a percentage sign. Then at the same point, around 1 second in, I'm going to keyframe the slider effect. Then I'm going to find the point when the circle stops transitioning in. And I'm also just going to press this center one, and this will mess up the positioning, but it also means that now it will automatically, when the number changes, which is what's going to happen, it's going to automatically center it, which is what we want. And yeah, at this exact point, I'm going to change the slider amount to 90. And I'm then just going to center the text again. And now the text will go from 0 to 90% like the circle, but it's not going at the same rate because it's also not been, the graph hasn't been edited. So I'm going to highlight these two slider keyframes for the text. I'll press F9, I'll go into the graph editor and I'll create a steep peak at the start like we did for the circle. And now the the number should be tracking onto the movement of the circle. So when the circle's like 45% in, the actual text should say 45% as well. Then just before this last null position keyframe, I'm going to add a position keyframe for the camera, and then I'm going to go forward by around a second or two, and then I'm just going to move the camera further away from the circle. Then actually I'm just going to space out these keyframes a bit. I'm going to highlight them and I'll move them forward a bit in time, and I'll also go into the graph editor to create a steep peak to the left of the middle, like so. And now it will zoom in and then zoom back out again. And as the voiceover says business, I'm going to then get the text tool and I'm going to type up business in the same impact font, and I'm going to make it 3D and I'll place it below the null and I'll scale it up and position it where I want it to be, which is in the middle of the screen. I'll change the color so and then it is orange, and I'll search up glow in the effects and presets and I'll add the glow effect onto the text. I'll increase the radius to around 100. Actually, I'll increase it a bit more, and I'll search up in the effects and presets drop shadow and I'll add that onto the business text. Then I'm going to move it so and then the text starts around 2 seconds in, or when I actually want it to pop in. And I'm going to keyframe the opacity at 0% at the start here. Then I'm going to go forward by around 5 keyframes and I'll make the opacity 100%. And now it transitions in quite smoothly. And also at this same exact point, just as the text starts to fade in, I'm also going to keyframe the opacity of the 90% text. And then I'm going to go to the second opacity keyframe and I'll make it 0% as well. So basically this will replace the 90% text with the business text. So just before the final camera 1 position keyframe, I'm going to add a position keyframe for the null, and I'm going to go forward by around a second or two. And then I'm just going to zoom out or move the camera further away from the circle. I'll highlight these 2 keyframes, I'll go into the graph editor and I'll create a steep peak to the left of the middle again. And now it's going to zoom out in quite a smooth way. I'll move these closer to the start, and actually I'll just play around with the keyframes a bit as well. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to import this trophy icon, which I forgot to add at the start, and I'm going to add this onto the timeline. I'll scale it down and position it in the middle. Then I'll make it 3D and I'm going to move it closer to the camera. And the goal is for it to start off behind the camera, but as we zoom out, it comes into shot. So I'm just going to keep playing around with the position until it looks smooth, and I'm happy with that. So I'm then going to search up in the effects and presets glow, and I'm going to add the glow effect onto this trophy. I'm going to increase the radius to around like 700, 800, and I'm going to decrease the glow threshold and glow intensity to around 0.2, actually 0.25, I'll make that. Then I'm going to add the drop shadow effect onto this trophy, and I'm going to increase the softness to around 50. Now I want a transition to split this section up from the next section, and I'm going to use Animation Composer 3 for this. You can find a free light leak overlay if you don't want to use Animation Composer 3, or you don't even need a transition if you don't want it. But I'm going to open up Animation Composer 3. I'm going to go to Starter Precomps, Transitions, and I'm going to add the Generated Light Leak 2 effect here. Then I'm going to go forward by around 6 frames from the cut, and then I'm going to cut it. Then I'm going to go 6 frames back from the cut, and I'm going to cut it again. So now the transition is shorter. So now, as you can see, there is a clean flash transition. And at the exact cut of the transition, I'm going to highlight all of the other layers apart from the voiceover, and I'm just going to press Control Shift D or Command Shift D to basically cut it. And basically everything we've done until now is now being cut at this point. And now we're gonna like create a new camera and new everything within a like new scene, I guess, and to finish the edit. So I'm going to create a new black solid, and I'm going to place this below the light leak. I'm going to cut it at this point, and I'm going to search up in the effects and presets gradient ramp, and I'm going to add the gradient ramp effects onto the black solid. I'm going to press swap colors, and I'm going to make the top color this like orangey red color. And I'm going to increase the ramp scatter to 512, and I'll play around with the position a bit as well. Then I'm going to add this smoke effect overlay onto the timeline, and I'll scale it up so it fits the rest of the composition. I'll toggle switch modes, and I'll change the mode to overlay. And this will make everything a lot darker, but I do want this dark vibe for the second part. But to make it a bit less dark and so I can see the actual gradient a bit more, I'm going to change the opacity of this to around 70%. And as you can see now, we have this like smoky fire overlay. And actually I'll make this background just a bit more red. And actually now I'm looking back at the video, I want to add a vignette onto like the first scene. So I'm going to create a new adjustment layer, and I'm going to place this below all of the new layers, and I'm going to cut it when the new scene starts. And I'm going to search up in the effects and presets vignette, and I'll add this onto the adjustment layer. And as you can see now, we have a adjustment layer onto the rest of it. But I've also just noticed that you can see the trophy at the start because it carries on throughout the whole video. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim it so then it starts just before it actually comes into shot, because we don't need it for the first part anyway. So I'm just going to trim it to this point. Now I'm going to carry on with the rest of the scene. So I'm going to create a new camera, and I'm also going to create a new null object, and I'm going to cut these 2 layers at the same point as the rest, and I'm going to move the light leak above all of these layers. Then I'm going to make all of these layers 3D, and I'm going to link camera 3 to null 2. Then I'm going to keyframe the position and Z rotation at the start of the new camera. Then I'm going to go forward by around a second, and I'm going to add another set of keyframes. Then I'm going to go back to the original ones, and I'm going to move the camera further away from the background, and I'm going to rotate it to around positive 12. Because we've also run out of background again, I'm going to search up motion tile again, and I'm going to add this onto one of the background layers. Then I'm going to increase the output width to 600 and the output height to 600. I'll click mirror edges, I'll copy this, and I'll paste it onto the second background layer. So now the background will carry on for longer. But I'm also just going to change the position of this particles overlay just a bit, or move it down, I guess. But this is all just personal preference at the end of the day. I'm also going to click on it, and I'm going to go to transform, then flip vertical, because I want the particles to move the other way. And yeah, as you can see now, the particles kind of go both ways. And yeah, this is the look that I was going for. But I wanted to like start further into the thing because I don't like the way it starts. So I'm just going to trim it so then it starts later on. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with this. So I'm then going to import one of my fighting icons. I'm going to center it and scale it up. And I'm also going to search up in the effects and presets fill, and I'll add this fill effect onto the icon. I'll make the fill color white. And I'll also make it 3D, and I'll put it below the new null. And I'll also trim it at the same point as the rest of them. And as you can see now, it scales in. I'm going to highlight these 4 keyframes, I'll press F9, and in the graph editor, I'm going to create a steep peak right at the start. And as you can see now, it rotates and scales in, but it's not really scaling in enough. So I'm just going to move the camera a bit further away by changing the 3rd position value. Then around 5 seconds in, I'm going to keyframe the null 2, and I'm going to go forward by around a second, and then I'll move the camera position to the right. I'm going to zoom out a bit as well. Then I'll highlight these 2 keyframes, press F9, I'll go into the graph editor to create a steep peak with the graph to the left of the middle. Then I'm just going to adjust the positioning of this a bit as well. Then I'm going to add in my second fighting icon, and I'm going to make it 3D and move it so then it's in front of the new the second camera movement. Then I'm just going to center it, and as you can see, it goes from the first fighting icon to the second. Then around 6 seconds in, I'm going to move the camera so then it's to the right again, so then now it's like in front of nothing again. And the plan is to go from, basically just move the camera from left to right, and it's going to stop a couple times to show the icons. But as you can see, we've run out of the red background. So I'm going to go into the black solid 3 and I'm going to increase the output width so then it covers the rest of the composition. I'll highlight these two keyframes. I'll go into the graph editor to create a steep peak to the left of the middle. So as you can see now, the camera movements are looking quite smooth. But actually, I'm just going to adjust the positioning of the keyframes a bit as well. But this is all personal preference, but I'm just going to play around with it to get the desired look that I want. Then just before the final camera position keyframe, I'm going to keyframe null 2, go forward by around 2 seconds, and I'm going to zoom out again. Then while I've got these two keyframes highlighted, I'm just going to move a bit to the right as well. Then I'm going to highlight these two keyframes and I'll create a steep peak to the left of the middle. Then I'm going to import this earth icon that I found on FreePic. I'll make it 3D and I'm going to move it to the right. Then I'll move it closer to the camera and I want this to be behind the camera at the start and then transition in as the camera moves out. So I'm just going to keep playing around with the positioning of this until I get that look. But I'm also just going to scale it up a bit as well. And I just forgot there's supposed to be a third fighting icons, but I couldn't find an icon which was like had 2 people fighting. I could only find 2 of those and I wanted 3. So I just found 2 individual like fighting icons and I'm just going to add them next to each other. I'll just scale this one up because it's a bit smaller than the other one. I want them to be the same size. I'll flip horizontal on this one so then it's facing the other one, and I'm also just going to scale it up so then they are both the same size. And I'm also just going to play around with the positioning of them as well. And actually, I'm just going to play around with the graph of this middle one a bit as well and just make it a bit to the left because I just want a really good movement between these 3 icons. Then I'm going to search up in the effects and presets gradient ramp and I'm going to add that onto the icons. I'll start off with the first one. I'll play around with the positioning of the gradient and I'll also make the top color this orange color like so. Then I'll search up in the effects and presets glow and I'll add this onto the icon. I'll increase the glow threshold to 0%. And I'll increase the glow radius to around 140 and I'll decrease the intensity to around 0.7. But now I'm just going to copy and paste this gradient onto all of the other icons. And I'm also just going to adjust the positioning of the gradient on one of these icons here. And as we can play this back, I'm pretty happy with this, so I'm just going to leave it here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to the last part. So just before the final null 2 position keyframe, I'm going to add a position keyframe on the camera. Then I'm going to go forward by around a second and I'm going to move the camera closer to the globe and I'm also going to move it up so and then it's basically like in front of the top part like so. Then I'm going to type up with the text tool business. I'll make it 3D and I'll move it below null 2 and I'm just going to move it to the right and position it so and then it's just on top of the globe. I'm also going to change the font to Montserrat semi-bold, and I'm also just going to adjust the positioning of this text as well. I'll change the fill color of this to white, and I'm also going to add a glow onto this. I'll increase the radius to around 120, 130, and I'm also going to add a glow onto this globe. And these are the settings I'm going to use for the globe. I'll make the glow threshold for this around 40, 50%. I'll make the glow radius around 200%, and I'll make the glow intensity around 0.4. But then around 7.5 seconds in, or as the voiceover says business, I'm going to bring the text forward so and then it starts at that exact point. And then I'm going to type up in the effects and presets typewriter and I'll add this onto the text. Then I'll press U to show the automatic keyframes it's made for me. And I'll move these 2 keyframes closer to each other by a lot because I want the text to type out quite quickly. Then actually I'm just going to adjust the graph for these last 2 keyframes because I forgot to do that. So I'll make a steep peak to the left of the middle. And as you can see now it zooms out and then zooms back in. And I'll just adjust the positioning of these keyframes a bit as well. Then actually when I want the whole thing to end, I'm just going to drag this over to here and then I'm going to right click and I'm going to press trim comp to work area. Then I'm going to create a new black solid and this is just going to be over everything. I'm then going to cut it when the like transition has its cut. Then I'm going to search up in the effects and presets fill and I'll add this onto the first one. I'll change the fill color to blue. Then I'm going to copy this and I'll paste it onto the second one as well. But then I'll change the second fill color to red. So now the first part of the video has a blue solid over it and the second part of the video has a red one over it. And what I'm going to be creating with these is I'm just going to create a really simple overlay. So to make it an overlay, I'm going to change the opacity of it to 5% and I'll do that for both of them. And now it will just have a very subtle blue overlay on the first part of the video and a very subtle red overlay on the second part of the video. And I'll also add the light leak at the top. I also want a transition at the start. So I'm going to open up Animation Composer 3. I'll go to Starter Precomps, Transitions, and I'm going to add the digital glitch transition at the start, and I'll add the short one. Then I'm going to trim it so then it starts at the cut. And as you can see now, there is a simple glitch transition at the start. And now I want to add that low frame rate look that you can see in a lot of Eman Gatsy's and Houston Kold style reels. So I'm going to create a new adjustment layer, and I'm going to type up in the effects and presets posterized time. I'll change the frame rate to 14. I shall change it to 16. And now I've done that, this is the finished reel.
You need to allocate most of your focus to your business in order to succeed. And this is because there's plenty of competition.
Just a quick reminder about skill cut. If you are a beginner or intermediate video editor looking to level up and edit like a professional as soon as possible, then I would highly recommend that you check out skill cut through the top link in the description below.